The romantic idea of a happy marriage that would last a lifetime has never been more tested than in the 20th century. This three-part series celebrates the enduring power of an age-old institution that has survived into the modern age of individual freedom and affluence. We begin by taking a new look at marriage during the first half of the century, when the wedding day was often the culmination of a long courtship and finally a proposal.
I arranged to meet her, sat down on a bench and said, "Darling, I've got 25 quid, will you marry me?" And so she became my fiancée.
Life is wonderful when you love.
This was an era when the ideal of romantic love in marriage had to withstand the harsh realities of a world very different to today.
This must be heaven.
Yet many marriages were defined by friendship rather than conflict and strife. Above all else, couples wanted to provide a stable and loving home for their children. This was even true of those who struggled to bring up large families on the breadline.
I did not want a great large family. It was just a case of what God sends you've got to put up with. And God sent me all these kids and I'd got to put up with them. And I brought them up. And I didn't ask God, man, or the devil for help to bring them up. I brought them up myself, my husband and I. He worked for him and I looked after him. So what more could we want?
Despite the separation and tragedy of 2 world wars, most marriages not only survived, some became even stronger. A commitment to see things through, whatever challenges lay ahead, bonded couples together for life in the most powerful way.
How does one describe the feeling that you have of being complete when the other person is with you? Then you feel whole. I'm very, very glad I loved my husband, and I was lucky in getting Reg, and a man like Reg.
At the beginning of the 20th century, most girls grew up believing it was their destiny to one day fall in love, get married, and have children. Victorian attitudes to innocence and sexual purity ensured that many girls and boys would remain ignorant of the basic facts of life, as ideals of ladylike and gentlemanly behavior were passed down through the generations. This is the Norfolk country estate, where writer Diana Athill spent much of her childhood, dreaming of one day meeting her own Prince Charming.
My granny had very firm ideas. I don't know whether she told me or whether my mother told me, but Granny believed that no lady could possibly let a man kiss her unless they were going to get married, unless she was in love with him. She wouldn't like it unless she was in love with him. And no gentleman, of course, would dream of kissing a girl unless he was going to marry her because he was in love. And this was what her daughters were brought up believing, and I think my mother was.
This ideal of romantic love had long been the stuff of popular fiction. Many couples expected to fall in love at first sight, like Diana's mother and father.
He fell in love with her on sight, and I think it was in the conservatory halfway through the dance. He kissed her. Whereupon, of course, my mother, who enjoyed it immensely, she'd never been kissed by anybody, it was terribly exciting, and so she thought, she was so excited and delighted at being kissed by this extremely nice young man, that she thought she was in love with him. She must be, because she'd let him kiss her. And according to my grandmother, that meant she was in love with him.
Convinced that they were in love with each other, Diana's parents were married in 1916, totally unprepared for what was to follow.
She hadn't a clue of what sex was going to be like. And I must say, I think it's quite possible my father hadn't either. His colonel wrote a letter to all the young officers who joined the regiment. And one of the things he said was that there would always be plenty of sport of every kind that he encouraged his young officers to indulge in. Football, tennis, cricket, hunting, of course, and riding. But he did not like young men who spent a lot of time messing about in London. That meant women. And so I'm quite certain my father hadn't spent a lot of time messing about in London. So it's quite likely that he was as virginal as my mother was.
It's likely, too, that many of the young single men who volunteered to serve in the First World War were also virgin soldiers. They'd been brought up to believe that a man had to be patriotic and protective towards women and children if he wanted a wife. This ideal of manliness saw war as a great adventure and an opportunity to prove courage and valor, encouraging some boys to lie about their age on joining up, like 17-year-old George Louth.
My captain sent a sergeant out to me. He said, "Louth, we're going to France," he said, "and we don't want you crying when you get over there. Say you're not old enough." He says, "because it won't happen. You won't come back. So say it now." I said, "I'm going with the lads."
Totally unprepared for what was to come, the horror of trench warfare shattered the innocence of a generation of young men. George narrowly survived the slaughter of the Battle of the Somme. Suffering from shell shock, he was discharged and sent to work on the land in Dorset. But then life completely changed for George. At the age of 20, he fell in love for the first time with the daughter of his landlady.
Her name was Ella, and we courted for 8 months, and we came out at the back door together, and I said, "Will you marry me?" She was shook. So then we decided, when we went indoors, and we gave the news to the mother-in-law, and she clapped. She clapped. The
lasting memory of the war for George Louth was not valour or glory, but the true love which he had found with his sweetheart Ellen. Their wedding day was on November the 11th, 1918, which, unbeknown to them, turned out to be Armistice Day.
Got married, and as we came out, we'd see all the flags flying. We thought it was for us. And it wasn't. It was Armistice Day, 11 o'clock, when we got married. Yeah, she was more first, lonely. Never strayed from that day to this.
Some men did stray, however, and official information films were quick to point out the dangers posed by loose liaisons. Staying true to a fiancé or wife, these films warned, was the key to avoiding sexually transmitted disease, like VD, for which there was no cure at the time. Emotional control was the only option for those like Diana Attill's parents, who was stuck in a sexually incompatible marriage.
She never did actually find him physically attractive. And this was the secret of how you made the best of it in those days if this happened. But this was the reason why that their marriage, although she always knew he was a very nice man, but she did not like sex with him. It was an underlying tension in their marriage from then on, which we as children, of course we didn't know what it was, but we sensed always that there was something wrong between them.
It was only much later that Diana discovered what had happened between her mother and father.
One of his fellow officers and my mother began an affair. And she discovered during this what sex was really like and that she loved it. It was all right, you know. But this affair came to light. It was a frightful climate. It must have been ghastly. She had become pregnant. And my father, being an extremely honourable and kind and good man, did accept it. And my sister Patience was born. And one of the reasons why, by the time I was 18, I guessed that my sister was not my father's daughter. One of the reasons was he was always so much nicer to her than he was, and he was nice to all of us, but he was especially nice to her. And that was so figured. You know, if he would have done that because he wasn't going to blame the child.
Diana's parents stayed together for life in an era when divorce was very difficult and dishonourable. Since before the First World War, the suffragette movement had been demanding rights for women as a way to create more equal marriages and a more equal and better world. And although most women over 30 would gain the vote in 1918, social changes were slow in coming. Many accepted their parents would help them choose their husband, like Hetty Bauer, who grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family.
I just took it for granted that one day it would happen. I didn't spend time dwelling on it. I was a very practical. Hockey was my great joy, and I was hockey captain of the school, and that occupied me. My parents would probably find me a suitable young man. I would look at his photograph and decide, or several photographs, and pick which one.
But Hetty's views on life and love were about to change, inspired by the rise of a new political force in British life, the labour and trade union movement. The First World War had not brought an end to poverty, unemployment, and appalling housing conditions, as many politicians had promised. So an impassioned young Hetty joined the ranks of the Labour Party in London's East End as a volunteer, collecting subscriptions door to door.
I went to number 60 Montague Road, and a little woman with bright blue eyes said, "Mr. N. Bauer." Nobody called N. Bauer. "What's it about?" And I said, "Well, I'm from the Labour Party." "Oh," she said, "that's our Reg." And she called up the passage, Reg, there's somebody here from the Labour," and left me and this young, very good-looking young man with a most charming smile. And my first reaction immediately was, "Oh, what a pity he's not Jewish."
Hetty soon discovered that Reg not only shared her politics, he also shared her passion for the countryside and music. Their love gave Hetty the strength to resist her parents' initial disapproval of her non-Jewish boyfriend.
His kindness, his courtesy, his warmth for humanity. You couldn't help but feel it.
In the 1920s, those who lived and worked in the countryside had fewer choices of partner than in the cities. A sweetheart would often be someone met at the local school or at work on a local farm. This was how Marion Atkinson came to fall in love in the remote Roththwaite Valley in the Lake District where she'd grown up. In 1922, she was working as a farm servant when she met her first love.
We knew one another when we were 12. We went to the same school. And when I was 17, I went to this place, and lo and behold, my husband was the horseman there. I always liked him, and he was a big, tall, good-looking bloke. And I used to go into my own bedroom at night, I used to think, I wonder if he lost me out. I was allowed to go out on Sunday afternoon, and I could go to church if I wanted to. It took, 5 or 6 months before he got to the stage of saying, oh, don't go to church. When I've had my tea up at home, I'll come down and we'll have a walk across the field. After we'd been walking for a while and we'd admired the flowers and the trees and that, he got a bit closer and put his arm round me, and we walked, and I put my arm round the back of him, and we walked quite close together. As we were striding across the field, I slipped, and he grabbed me in both arms, and he kissed me on that bank. And that was the first time I can remember he ever kissed me.
After a 2-year courtship, Marion and Bill married in 1924, and their first baby arrived a year later. But this was no romantic rural paradise. Life was hard and dominated by work and constant childbearing. In remote areas, there was little knowledge of contraception and pregnancy, and childbirth was accepted fatalistically. Marion had 6 children in quick succession, yet she still managed to create a stable family life, working almost every day with her husband on the farm.
When I found out I was pregnant again, I used to say to my husband, oh God, not again, how are we going to manage? But we did manage. It was just blooming hard work, and that was the end of it. And sometimes you think, what the devil am I doing all this for? I'm getting nothing out of it. But you see, we were getting something out of it. And when you're married to a man and been married to him for years, you've got to pull with him. I mean, so could you have stood by and seen your husband work his fingers to the bone without helping? No. I had to muck in and do men's work. It was hard work, blooming hard work, and I didn't agree with all of it, but I did it.
Love on the dole was even harder to sustain. In the 1920s and 30s, Britain suffered mass unemployment as traditional industries like textiles, shipbuilding and coal mining declined. With unemployment reaching 3 million, the self-esteem of a generation of young men who believed it was their duty to be a breadwinner took a serious blow. Most jobs on offer were short-term and unskilled, as Yorkshireman Robert Williamson discovered.
They were all casual jobs which you got. 8 weeks, you get 8 weeks with your local council. We used to call it 8 weeks desk work. You know, you'd be navvying, laying cable. You know, everybody was going on to electricity in them days, and there was always jobs going, digging the pavement up and laying high-tension cables. Skilled men were doing, we were doing the digging and filling in. You felt embittered, but you see, it was commonplace. When I got married, I didn't have a job. 19th of December, 1931.
Poverty surveys into working-class life in the 1930s revealed one key factor in family survival through hard times: the love and labour of the wife and mother. Her skills in cooking, cleaning, washing and housekeeping were respected in the control she was often given over the family finances. John Salinas grew up in Liverpool.
I always thought of poverty as my mother's purse, which contained the wealth of the family. Imagine, the wealth of the family was in that purse. And it was put in on payday, and it had to last till the next payday. And very, very often it didn't. And when the last penny was gone from the purse, that was it.
No money meant the rent collector couldn't be paid on his weekly visit. But every mother knew the best time-honoured way to avoid him.
We would hear him approach from afar, and the doors would go dut, 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 dut. And then the next door would go, dut, 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 dut. And then everything must be silent. And he would appear at your door in the shape of the shadow of the two legs between the bottom of the door and the lobby. And then that clap would come on your door. And all was silent, silent, silent. And after a while it would go again, twice. And then you would hear it go further down the street, and we all breathed again then. It was a lovely day when you could pay the rent. Oh, door was open, everybody happy in the house, you know.
Even well-to-do families who enjoyed what seemed to be an idyllic life in the countryside could not escape the economic turmoil of the 1930s. Diana Attill's family inheritance, handed down from one generation to the next, was dwindling fast. Her parents found it difficult to come to terms with their reduced circumstances, but Diana believed that marriage would save her from having to work for a living.
We ourselves, in my family, were always a bit short of money. And there was a terrible time when the bank said, my mother was extravagant, my father was very careful. The bank told them they mustn't cash another cheque at one point, I remember. Panic stations all round, because we didn't have much money. We felt, and I was being told from when I was a child, you know, when you grow up you'll have to earn your own living, which used to strike me as being rather shocking considering what I was surrounded by at that time. But I thought, oh well, I suppose that'll be so. Excepting, of course, I'd be married by then, so my husband will keep me.
Young ladies like Diana usually found prospective marriage partners from a closed circle of eligible young men they met at balls, dances, and dinners. When she was 17, Diana went to a dance with Tony, a student at Oxford University with whom she'd secretly fallen in love. Driving home after the dance, Diana wondered if he felt the same way about her.
There was a level crossing and the train was coming, so we stopped at the level crossing. And at the level crossing, Tony didn't just put his arm round me, but he kissed me. And to this day I can remember, it was rather a disappointing kiss, because I had expected my first kiss would be a sort of rapture. But he had been sitting with the cold air blowing in on his face, and his lips were cold and rather sort of sticky. And I thought, well, that's not much fun. And then I remembered reading somewhere, I think it was in one of Thomas Hardy's books, first kisses are usually disappointing. And that's all right. Thomas Hardy said, first kisses are disappointing, so that's all right.
Before May is upon us, let's take a look at wedding styles.
In a time of economic uncertainty, the allure of true love and the glamorous white wedding became even more captivating. But influenced by the new ideals of feminism and socialism, a growing number of modern women, like Hetty Bauer, wanted something much more simple and unconventional. So Hetty got married in her local registry office.
Wednesdays was the early closing day for that area of Clapham. And so we arranged to get married on Wednesday afternoon. And my sister Anita was disapproved of the modern woman marrying. She, thought marriage was totally unnecessary.
One campaign which helped to define the modern woman's attitude to marriage was the family planning movement inspired by Mary Stopes. She emphasized the importance of contraception in preventing unplanned large families and established the first birth control clinic in London in 1921. Coming from a family of 10, Hetty was determined not to fall into the same trap as her mother.
I knew I was never going to go in for a family that size. So I had to take precautions about becoming pregnant. I didn't want to have a baby before I had saved quite an amount of money so that I could be at home with the baby for at least 2 years after birth.
It was in the countryside that large families remained more commonplace. Here, the benefits of modern family planning took effect much more slowly. But few families grew as large as that of Marion Atkinson in the Lake District. She and her husband Bill raised 15 children.
Children, when they came as quick as they came to me, got a burden at times. And you used to feel, you can't put up with any more of it. I've had enough. I'm going to run away. I've said many a time in my married life, I'm going to run away. And I'd walk out of the back door, and I'd look at the door, and I'd think, well, I've no money and nowhere to go, so I'd better go back in. So what could you do? I mean, so don't get me wrong, that life wasn't all roses, because it wasn't. We had our ups and downs, our fallouts, so many a time over the children.
Despite the isolation and the unrelenting nature of farm work, surprisingly, the shared hardship between husband and wife often created a strong sense of solidarity. In these unremittingly tough times, marriages had to be equally robust.
They were all in bed by 8:30. Well, my husband and I used to go to bed 9 to 8:30. So we had an hour on our own. We used to sit each side of the fireplace and discuss things you can't discuss in front of children, or talk about how we were managing, or what we would like to do, or where we were going next, or just things between me and him that, or what we would have liked to have done, or where we would have liked to have been. And we did discuss all these things, but we never let the children know. We never let them think we were discontent. We used to like to make them feel they were a contented family, happy, contented family.
This was the 30s image of the ideal family. Suburban, middle class, and built on the solid foundation of a father at work, a full-time mother, and 2 children. But during the economic depression, the love and commitment of comfortable middle-class couples would also be tested to the limit. When Denise Robertson's family were plunged into poverty after her father's company went bankrupt, her mother was determined to put a brave face on it.
When things got really bad, she would sit down and play the piano, and the song she used to play was "Spread a Little Happiness." Even though the darkest clouds are in the sky, you mustn't sigh and you mustn't cry. Spread a little happiness till clouds roll by.
Life is wonderful when you love.
Denise and her sister came to believe that, as in the movies, true love was the key to the happiness of her mother and father.
He used to come home for lunch, and when it was time for him to go back, they would go into the hall, and my sister and I, we would run up the stairs and look through the bars and scream, "Hollywood, Hollywood," because they were locked in one another's arms, kissing, and they couldn't bear to part for him to go back after lunch. So I think there was a fair degree of passion in that relationship.
Come along now, into bed.
Got a good night kiss for Daddy? Night-night.
It made me realise that a good marriage could withstand whatever came against it from outside, because we were being battered from outside by all kinds of things. The lack of money, the fact that they had come down in the world, which I think had a profound effect on them. I don't think my father ever really recovered from it.
In 1936, Diana Athill went up to Oxford University and soon immersed herself in the privileges and pleasures of university life. As an 18-year-old woman, Diana had lost none of her enduring seriousness about marrying the right man. Her relationship with Tony had developed slowly and steadily. He was the man she loved. Tony had by now joined the RAF, but although he was stationed in Lincolnshire, this didn't prevent him from coming to Oxford on regular visits.
He used to fly down from Grantham, where he was stationed, which was terribly dashing compared to everybody else. My young man would fly down and would come and take me out. And we used to have lovely times.
For Diana, her relationship with Tony had reached a turning point.
Things warmed up gently, to the point where at the end of one term, we spent our first night in bed together. As a matter of course, really. But of course, no question of telling anybody. And very soon afterwards, we got engaged.
The taboo about sex before marriage remained as strong as ever. And early sex education films were warning young women
I believe you're only amusing yourself.
men were only after one thing,
All this is a game to you.
and it was the girl who said no that got her man.
I love you.
How many girls have you said that to?
No, Betty, I mean it.
For a new generation of young women like Diana Athill, this prudery seemed old-fashioned, but the serious business of marriage was unquestioned.
I was a virgin, and I didn't actually particularly enjoy the first time because of that, excepting for the wonderful sort of fact that this was happening. Because I was very much in love with him by then, and so it could only be a good thing.
Couples dreaming of marriage were beckoned by a brave new world of suburban, semi-detached and detached homes. Between the wars, there was a boom in home ownership amongst the middle classes, and local councils built 1 million homes for rent on cottage estates. In 1938, Robert Williamson and his family moved into their brand new council house in Leeds.
Well, when we moved into this council house, 61 Howlett Road, it was like going into heaven. It was a block of 4 and we were on the end, which meant ours was semi-detached, wasn't it? It was easier being at home then, because you had something to do worthwhile, getting your garden right.
There were many undreamt-of luxuries that came with his new council house, and to Robert it seemed that life could only get better for him and his family.
Every night, my wife would run the bath. When it was ready, she'd call down, "Come up, Daddy, the bath's ready." No one was waiting, so I'd go up, splash it a time or two, and that croon of a tune. Swing me in the moonlight tonight.
But Robert's dream of domestic bliss was cut short when war with Germany was declared in September 1939 and conscription was introduced. Britain's young husbands, fathers and fiancés marched off to a war from which they might never return. For some, the last goodbye was unbearable.
Me and my wife, we couldn't talk about this separation because it was too painful. There's always that knowledge that we would may never see each other again. Never thought I'd come back. Never thought I'd come back. And I think that the people who saw you off didn't think, well, they didn't come to see you off because it was too harrowing. I wouldn't have it. The only person that was there to see me off was my dad, you see, because he'd gone through the same situation, hadn't he? But he'd come back alive.
For John Salinas, who had joined the Merchant Navy in 1935, shore leave during the war took on an entirely new meaning. It gave John the opportunity to continue his courtship with his new girlfriend, Dorothy. They'd met and fallen in love just weeks before the war started.
I remember coming home up from London to Lime Street. Dorothy was meeting me on the station. And as I walked down the platform, I passed a very pretty girl, and she had a picture hat tilted on one side and a beautiful suit. And I felt a little bit guilty. Anyway, I couldn't find Dorothy. And I went back, and it was this lovely girl. It was she. Whenever I was on leave, we used to go to the cinema. We spent our courting days in the cinema, sitting by one another, holding hands. And it was, it was heaven. And of course, there was always the smell of her clothes and the smell of herself that was special. We had a marvellous time when I was on leave. And so it went on. Voyage, leave, fun, voyage.
Sweets to my sweet, let them entreat you to forgive me, darling.
And then one day my sister Lil said to me, "Do you intend marrying Dorothy?" I said, "Of course I do." And so she said, "Well, you better get on with it or you're going to lose her."
Now once upon a time, we'd bill and we'd coo. We promised that we'd both be true.
I immediately took Dorothy to Sefton Park, sat down on a bench and said, "Darling, I've got 25 quid, will you marry me?" And so she became my fiancée. And we were betrothed.
For Diana Attill, the outbreak of war meant an inevitable delay in her plans to marry her RAF fiancé Tony, to whom she had been engaged since 1938. Tony was stationed in the Far East with an RAF bomber squadron. Diana knew he was in considerable danger and was determined to keep in touch.
Letters flew back and forth between us. And I loved writing letters. I was a very good letter writer. And I remember one of his letters, he said, "Look, I'm not nearly such a good letter writer as you are. It's much harder for me to write letters, so I won't be writing quite as many letters as I ought to. Don't let that stop you writing, because I'd die if you stopped writing to me." So when his letters started falling off, I went on writing. After that, I had 2 letters from him, just as good as they used to be, and then silence, absolute silence. And I thought, well, he told me not to stop writing, so I didn't stop writing. I don't know how long I went on writing into the silence, but it was for quite a long time. I didn't know what had happened. And it was not knowing that was so terribly painful.
Living in wartime London, Diana was well aware of a new spirit of living for the moment in the face of an ever-present threat of death. This often led to the casting aside of convention and the breaking of solemn promises. But after not hearing from her fiancé Tony for more than a year, Diana still had no idea what his silence meant.
I got from him at that stage a little formal letter saying, would I kindly consider our engagement over because he was marrying somebody else. And it was a terrible, awful shock, really, because I thought to myself, I had an image in my head that I was lying in bed and my mother brought that letter up and silently handed it to me. And I read it, and I thought, oh, well, anyhow, I suppose it means that it's over. And I realized it wasn't over for me. And I had a sort of picture in my mind of a long bridge between 2 supports. And one of the supports had been knocked away, and the bridge was still sticking out there. And it was bad. I was going to be a wife, presumably I was going to be a mother. I had no idea of anything else that I wanted to be. That's what I had been planning to be. That's what I was certain I was going to be. And now I wasn't going to be. And I wasn't loved anymore. That was very, very bleak.
Love was under threat on all fronts, and nowhere more than at sea. The deadly menace of German U-boats meant 1 in 4 British merchant seamen never made it home. John Salinas was one of the lucky ones, but he almost took one risk too many in the name of love the day his ship went down.
I scramble off the bunk and I can't find the bloody door. Just cannot find the door. Eventually did. Went up onto the boat deck. When I got onto the boat deck, I realised I'd left Dorothy's picture in the cabin, and so I decided to go down and get it. Got it off the desk, and ships started to list, and I got back up on the deck. And as I emerge into the daylight, I think, I've won, I've got it. Stupid, but I'd do it again.
John and Dorothy were married in 1943 and still remain devoted to each other almost 70 years later. When the war ended in 1945, it often meant a difficult homecoming for partners who had to readjust and pick up relationships again after years of separation. For some, there was heartbreak. Diana Athill had to come to terms with the loss of her fiancé, Tony, to another woman. After the war, she discovered he had died in a bombing raid, leaving behind his wife, who was expecting their first child.
You can hardly really blame him. He was flying bombers. He must have known perfectly well that his chances were very low. She could be killed any minute. And there was this, I know now from her having met her son, that she was very charming, pretty, young, innocent, delightful girl, loyal and kind and brave and all the good qualities. And it would be a waste not to marry her, really.
Husbands and fathers came home to a country devastated by war. Yet despite this, for the vast majority of married couples, the long wait to meet again would end in a happy reunion with their family. Most, for better or for worse, would stay together for life, creating stable homes for their children.
The flags were out, everything was trimmed up, big cake, you know, welcome home. Yeah. Well, it was very emotive. You know, afraid I cried, you know, which I can't remember crying before, only when I got spanked on my bottom when I was about a few months old. I can't remember crying, only on that occasion. With joy, you know.
But this wasn't the brave new world families had fought for. Bombing raids had destroyed many homes, which put further pressure on relationships. There was a shortfall of 4 million homes, and many young couples were forced to live with parents and relatives in cramped conditions. Nevertheless, most were so pleased to be home, the simple joys of marriage and family life tasted all the sweeter. Even in poor working-class areas, there was a determination to make the best of it, a spirit captured by returning soldier Ed Mitchell, a husband utterly devoted to his wife and children.
I said to Peg during the war, whatever happens, Peg darling, we're going to be happy. No whether we've got any money or anything, we'll be happy. Well, in the early 50s, we were living in a little tiny terraced house, 95 Newmarket Street in Norwich. Because there's no bathroom and no hot water, nothing like that, and coal fires, you see, and it was 10 shillings a week. It had an outside toilet, and the coal house was outside as well.
The highlight of the week was birth night, a time when Ed's can-do spirit was pushed to the limit.
A bath night was always Friday night, and that was a panic, that was, because we had a bath which was called a bungalow bath, and they were long tin baths. I could just about sit in it with my knees out straight. And to heat the water up for that, we used to put a bath on the gas fire and light 2 burners underneath it and heat the water up. Shirley used to be bathed first, who was then a little baby. Then Graham was bathed in the same water. Then we put a couple of saucepans full of boiling water in the water, and as we're getting a bit of scum on top by then, and Graham was bathed. Peg would wipe them down and get them into bed, and then Peg would get in the bath and have her bath, put another couple of saucepans of the water in it. And time I got in the bath, because there was about an inch of scum on there, and the bloody water was lukewarm. And then to get it out of the kitchen, which was only about 8 foot by 4 foot wide, to get it out the kitchen door, tip it down the drain in the yard, was a bit of a job, because it slopped about all over the floor, and it was a panic. And I used to hang that up in the shed, which was Anderson's shelter.
Despite a brief upsurge in divorces immediately after the war, marriage soon became more popular than ever before. In the late 1940s and 50s, there was a boom in the numbers getting married, with around 500,000 couples tying the knot each year.
So you're going to get married, are you?
Most couples married in their early to mid-20s. Women who left it much later, or who appeared to have too many boyfriends, were viewed with suspicion. However, marrying the right man was a big decision, and having seen the passionate and enduring love enjoyed by her parents, Denise Robertson wasn't going to settle for anything less.
I had quite a lot of boyfriends when I was a girl, and my mother, who believed that if you weren't married at 21, it was my sister who'd been married at 20. You know, I got into my early 20s and I was showing no sign of settling down, and my mother became very agitated. And I remember she had a saying, "Too many rings around Rosie. Rosie gets no ring at all." And I don't know what I was holding out for, but I had, you know, I wanted what they'd had. I wanted to be stirred.
The dream of domestic bliss and a comfortable married life in the affluent suburbs was never stronger than in the post-war years. One contemporary survey showed that 71% of British wives were very happy, and only 4% were unhappy. A steadfast husband, the protector and provider, was part of this vision, as was his dutiful wife at home. But for some women, this was not all they wanted.
There was this place called Cleedon, which was where all the posh houses were, and all my friends simply wanted to be married to someone who could take them to Cleedon. And I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew Cleedon wasn't it. I wanted to be loved and protected. I thought, that's what you have a husband for. He shelters you.
There was a new respectability as strict rules about courtship were re-established. Early sex surveys of the late 1940s and early 50s revealed the enduring power of sexual taboos, which restrained many couples from having sex before marriage. And even on holiday, couples were policed by their parents, as Eileen Cook and her fiancé Arthur would discover when they went away together.
We were going to Blackpool, and we'd been courting over 2 years. And could we go to Blackpool for 4 days? Yes. So those days you had to write and get a letter. So I wrote and asked for 2 single rooms, and she wrote back, did the landlady. My mother read the letter, that's okay. So off we went on the Saturday to this boarding house. Sunday morning, my mother and Dad landed. They'd come on a coach trip, came to the hotel, and obviously we'd gone out that for the day. And could they have the tea with us? Yes. And could I go to Eileen's room to get washed? That was to check that I was in a single room, and Arthur's room were upstairs.
The deep sexual longings of many couples would only finally be expressed on their honeymoon. When Eileen Cook got married in 1950, she and Arthur went back to Blackpool. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, but Eileen was apprehensive about what to expect on her wedding night.
It's a bit intimidating, like, well, have her to put my pyjamas on, have her to take pyjamas, have her to take a nightie. It's a bit, you know, you're a bit worrying when you're not right sure whether you want to take a nightie or pyjamas. I mean, talking to some people at work, they say, well, you won't want either of them. I thought, I will. I'm not going into bed without a nightie on. Then when you're getting undressed, I think, well, have her to put my nightie on first, have her to put it on, and then will he ask me to take it off? I don't know whether it went on and came off or whatever. I've forgotten.
However, there was yet further embarrassment for Eileen as she contemplated coming down to breakfast with her husband the following morning.
Eileen, the wife, she was quite concerned. What, hey, how will we go on when we go down? They'll all be looking at us. What will they think? I said, I'm not bothered what they think. I said, you know, we're married now. Well, you know, I don't like going down. I said, well, I want some breakfast. I'm hungry. I said, come on, never mind what they think. He said, well, they'll be staring at us. I said, well, let them stare. I'm not bothered.
For married couples in the 50s, happiness was a new home, and DIY and home improvements became a national pastime. Even the addition of an indoor bathroom and toilet could be a dream come true.
They didn't have a bathroom and they didn't have an inside toilet. But through from the kitchen at the side was a kind of an archway and a fireplace beside it. So I busted through from the kitchen into this room, what was behind it, but that'd been a wash house, because there was a copper in the corner. So I took the copper out and I made her enter a bathroom. So now we had an indoor bathroom, but still had an outdoor loo. Had to go down the yard to the loo. So that joined the bathroom. So I busted through from the bathroom into the loo and put a doorway in there. So now we had indoor loo, indoor bathroom. And that was really going up market to have an indoor bathroom, because half of them houses up Glebe Road, you see, they didn't have a bathroom and they had never had an indoor loo.
The post-war baby boom grew out of a new spirit of optimism for the future. It was unquestioned that this future would be built around the institution of marriage, leading on to a happy and stable family life. The introduction of the welfare state and the National Health Service in the late 1940s made this life look more promising than ever before. Nevertheless, some of the new babies were unplanned, a consequence of their mother's total lack of any knowledge about birth control.
Kept going up now, feeling rotten and feeling quite sick. And Arthur came on and says, go across to doctors. And it was a new doctor that I didn't know, so he took me across to register at the doctor where we lived, his doctor. And he said, bring a sample of water in, your urine. So, which I did the following day, and he tested it. And he said, yes, you're pregnant. How can he tell with water? I thought, never in this world, no. So, and then I went on to my mother's, and I says, book me into our own doctor, which I did. And he took me in, and I said, the doctor at Barnoldswick says I'm pregnant, but I said, I'm not. I said, I just feel really sick. I think I've an ulcer or something. So he said, all right, I'll examine you. And then afterwards he says, yes. He said, you are pregnant. I think you're around about 3 months. I said, no, I can't be. He said, and why not? You're a married woman. I said, yes, but we haven't been trying. He said, well, if you haven't been trying, you've succeeded because you're definitely pregnant.
Eileen's baby son David was born in 1952. For her, motherhood was a rite of passage.
From the minute that David was born, the minute that they brought them in and put him in my arms, I suddenly grew up. Because until then, it had just been me. You know, just I did what I did. I went out and enjoyed myself. And then I realised that I had a great responsibility. This little tiny thing was solely going to be relying on me. And that is the first time I really felt that I'd grown up.
As with many others of her generation, Eileen and Arthur have remained happily married for life, and recently celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary. By the late 50s, a new and restless younger generation was growing up much faster. Inspired by modern jazz and rock and roll, they began to enjoy the fruits of affluence in post-war Britain. The new breed of young men and women were more independent and questioning of authority, very different from those who had served in 2 world wars. Denise Robertson bridged these 2 generations. She wanted a man who was like her father, but also different. When she met an older man from the Shetlands, a ship's captain on his shore leave on Tyneside, she thought she'd found him.
He rang me up and he said, you know, ship's coming in, I want to take you out, I've got something important to say to you. And I said to my mother, he's going to propose, but I'm not going to say yes this time. And he took me out to dinner and he said, I want to talk to you. I won't be seeing you again, because if I see you again, I will want to marry you, and I don't want to get married. And I thought, right, that's great. I don't have to worry. He, you know, he's not going to propose. And I promptly forgot all about him. I think that was October. And in January, he rang me up again and said, I don't know if I can live with you, but I know now I can't live without you. And we were married about 5 months later. And I have never been so happy.
But in the 60s and 70s, the institution of marriage would be questioned as never before. The baby boomers began to rebel against all the traditional values and institutions that had once been held dear. The stage was set for a cultural revolution that would start to transform the meaning of love and marriage in Britain forever.